Welcome, everybody, to another Smarter B2B weekly executive briefing. My name is J Snook, and I'm excited to be here. I cannot believe it is the last day of April, which means we are 1/3 of the way through 2020, and it feels like it's been a year already for many of us, I'm sure. So we're going to dive in today because I think as the conversation begins to shift towards what reopening the economy, both globally, nationally, and everything in between, may look like over the next several months, people are starting to get some sense of certainty, or some sense of where the uncertainty still lies, and they're starting to manage the day a little bit differently. We're all used to, and also probably a little bit over, the quarantine aspect of things, but we've also adjusted to this new reality and maybe some of the ideas that we'll take with it. Several people, as we've talked about in weeks past, have been dealing with death, dealing with the stress of job loss, things like that. That will continue. And so today we thought, this is at least starting to get back to some sense of we've got to figure out a plan for our business, for our organization, for our customer set, and how we're going to operate, because pretty much the next month or two, we're going to get back to work, even though this pandemic will still be with us for quite some time, and probably permanently on some level. So we thought we'd talk about today B2B selling strategies in what is likely to become a broad-based or globally scaled zero-based budgeting reality. So we'll dive right in, but we'll cover some of the logistics first. First of all, thank you to emerge.com. This episode specifically speaks to the value proposition that Emerged is targeting, and they were planning before COVID-19. And so it plays right into the zero-based budgeting thing. But for those of you who aren't familiar with what Emerge does and are looking at ways where you will generate relationships at scale with targeted prospects that actually matter, reduce the cost burden, and increase the ROI and LTV of high, complex, long sales cycle B2B sales inside of industries that typically may be more sales heavy than marketing heavy as far as infrastructure and teammates go. You want to check out emerge.com. Send them Decisions 2020, or let Cameron know when you speak to them over there. And they'll, as they assess fit, they'll give you, a customized list specifically for you that you could use or not, and review with them or not, far before ever going under contract, of at least 2,000 relevant targets that could help expand your business and your sales velocity moving forward. So take a look at emerge.com, reach out to Cameron. Thank you for them sponsoring these weekly briefings at Smarter B2B, because they wouldn't be free to you without it. My name is J Snook. As I said, if you want, chat with me, put questions and answers in the box, and feel free to basically let us know if you have any questions before or after the webinar. This will be available on replay as well. So let's move right ahead. Zero-based budgeting, what is it? Essentially, in layman's terms, every expense must be justified and approved for each new period. So if that period is a quarter-by-quarter basis for some companies, certainly it's on an annual basis. In the short term, coming out of this pandemic, and this global shutdown, these are likely to be quarter-by-quarter basis until there's some level of certainty on where the economy is going to be, where stimulus is going to be, and different things of that nature. So as you're looking ahead or panicking, realize that what's going on inside of your sales organization, or maybe even inside your C-suite, is they're trying to understand, what does a world look like where a majority of my customers may put everything on the table, or already have put everything on the table, and are starting to decide, what are we going to keep, change, or trash as we move forward? What can we live without? And really, zero-based budgeting, we'll talk about the myths and kind of how to sell into this, and how to strategically think about selling into this, and becoming that anchor value-added advisor that hopefully all B2B sellers are seeking to be. But you can either look ahead or you can panic, and I'm going to encourage you to hopefully take some of the information today and look ahead. Now, some of you may already have seen this impact, or you know that it's coming, but just out of curiosity, we've got a poll published. And so if you don't mind answering it, it gives us some good feedback into kind of the audience and where your concerns and your realities lie. So do you think your customers will churn at higher rates, the same, or less rates post-pandemic than maybe historically? Just give us your answer. That poll will stay open. You've probably seen it since you've been on the line here. It'll stay open for quite a bit, but I'd love to get some feedback from you there. So let's talk about strategies and myths of zero-based budgeting that may be in your mind, or just maybe you've never thought of, so you can understand kind of what it means, what it doesn't mean, and how to build your marketing and sales strategy and budgets around selling into a headwind that is likely going to face you across your customer set. So the first piece is to really understand, where does the law of compensation, in other words, where's the law of retention, revenue, compensation, disproportionate returns compared to your competitive set, where does that come from? What are the basic tenets of compensation in any reality, let alone a tough one like this? And so we'll cover those on the left here. The first of the three pillars for the law of compensation in any company, in any industry, in any individual sales performance or team are these three things. First, there's the need for what you do. Second, there is the ability at which you or your product or your service can fulfill that need consistently. And then there's the replaceability. Now, at first blush, you might think, well, that's obvious, I know that, but I want you to think about it a little bit deeper. So the need for what you and I do in the B2B world, what problem are we solving? What efficiencies are we creating for our target customer? What aspect of their ability to operate their business and means serve their customers, what aspect of that business are we fulfilling? How incrementally important, or how fundamentally important, or how nice to have important is the need that we fill for our customers as it relates to them fulfilling the needs of their customers? I'm going to say that again because that's a lot of words. So I'll try and say it shorter. Your customer is filling the needs of someone else. Where do you sit from a need standpoint and in their ability to do that? How good compared to who else they could use when you factor in everything, when you factor in feature sets, when you factor in customer service, when you factor in reliability, when you factor in cost, when you factor in ROI or competitive advantage, unfair advantage against their competitors as it relates to margin optimization, speed to market, speed of delivery, certainty of delivery, whatever the thing is, how well does your product or service, does your brand fill that need? So A, does the need exist, and is it fundamental to them operating? If it's not, we're already in trouble. If it is, then okay, well, if it's not a nice to have, it's a must have, then where do we stack across all these things as able to do it? And in a zero-based budgeting world, what we're also having to face is how broad or focused is our feature set? And is that feature, if it's a very focused feature set, is that feature something that is that big of a non-commodity, meaning they can't live without it, and no one really does it the way we do it. And because of that, it gives them an advantage to stay in business themselves. That's how hard or easy it will be to replace us. So when you think about a zero-based budgeting world, what it does not mean, dispelling the first myth against this fact of no matter what these 5 myths and dispelling them looks like for you, your ability to continue to gain customer traction or to survive and maintain as much of your existing customer base depends on their ability to fill a need, be irreplaceable, and have it, because if they're not in business, they can't pay you. But then whether they pay you or not, whether they stay in business or not, assuming that they do, are you replaceable by something else? Are you replaceable by not doing it at all? Because it doesn't necessarily mean they choose your competitor. It might just mean they stop doing it altogether. So the first myth that we have to think about and build a strategy around is zero-based budgeting does not mean starting at zero. What it means is that the culture of the company, so whoever's adopting a culture of zero-based budgeting, if that's not how they've already been operating prior to COVID-19, is building a culture of cost management, transparency, alignment of incentives, and accountability across the silos. That's what it means for someone to operate a zero-based budgeting culture or enterprise. It doesn't mean you're starting at zero and you're just going, we're not spending any money until we decide to spend money. Myth number two, a lot of times zero-based budgeting, people think it means cutting all costs to the bone. In other words, we're just going to cut and cut and cut and cut until we can't cut anymore because that's the only way we're going to do the bare minimum. And that sometimes is the reality, but that's not what it means. And that's not the modus operandi. It means that degree of cost cutting, meaning how I weight certain cost cutting against other cost cutting, is based upon my top-down target post-pandemic. So now I've reassessed. My P&L's out the window. My 3 to 5 year plans are out the window. They're gone. Everyone knows that. No one's going, aha, great, Chris, thanks for that. Obvious, right? So now my new top-down target, however I've come to arrive at that, based on macro analysis, based on industry analysis, based on feedback from my customers and what they're facing, headwinds that I'm looking at, whatever, geographic limitations, things, right? My top-down target, whatever that new one is what actually drives the degree of cost cutting. So a lot of times what you're going to see first, and may already have seen now, is you're going to get slow pays, obviously, but you're also going to get freezes. So for instance, when Cheesecake Factory, which operates, I think, a couple hundred restaurants, several different brands that are local that they acquired, like Fox Concepts out here a couple years ago, they acquired a bundle of about 15 Fox Concepts and operate them. But Cheesecake Factory, as most of you know, is, a franchise chain that operates all around the world or all around the domestic U.S., large footprint. On March 1st, or on March 15th to 20th, they announced that on April 1st, they weren't paying rent any of their landlords. None of them. So before April, they announced, we're not paying rent April 1. Now, the knock-on of the effects are a different conversation for a different day, but if you're the landlord, essentially you're a B2B selling them space to operate their business in as a restaurant, and they say we're not paying rent, are they saying that because they're not going to stay in business? Well, they might not stay in business, but likelihood is several of their brands, several of their locations will be back in business, will stay open, because people will eventually very soon, if not, over the next 6 months to a year, get back to eating out, and they have a following, and so they'll likely see a reconfiguration of their footprint inside for social distancing in the near term. The bottom line is they're going to be making food again, they're going to be selling food again, and they're not going to shut down all 200 locations. Or if they do, their competitors aren't. So the point is, if every restaurant business in the world, even the largest chains, publicly traded ones, decided April 1, they're not paying rent, is that a top-down retargeted decision, or is that a freeze because they can't assess what their new top-down is yet in the uncertainty? I think you know the answer to that. So what you're likely going to see in the near term in every business, from hospitality to anything right now, was the freezing or the kind of delay or the slow pay based on, I can't even build my new top down until I have a little bit more data. I think as we emerge out of April into May and certainly into June, regardless of when things reopen at a domestic scale here or whatever, we're going to start to get some level of certainty on what that plan will look like and what that horizon of time may look like. And then these top-down targets will be set and then hedged and conserved or conservatively done. And then you'll start to see a zero-based, budget from there, which means the degree to which they'll cut costs. So that's dispelling that myth of it's not just cutting to the bone. It's literally a staged process based on the new top-down target. Number 3, will zero-based budgeting overwhelm my customer's business and stop all activity? Meaning, is this going to be something that shuts everything down until they figure it out? Well, the answer is historically a transformation from some other form of budgeting process to a ZBB budgeting process or culture usually means a tiger team of people in the C-suite or cross-functional leaders that is centralized. And typically this takes 4 to 10 months. Well, we're already probably 2 months to 3 months in for the most proactive companies that saw this coming early January or hedged against it. But certainly by February, everyone knew that it was a thing. And by March, it hit everyone in the face. So you could figure that this began at rapid scale because there was nothing else to work on. So the other demands of the day, other than working from home, really allowed for a focus. So I don't know what that's going to mean, but I would imagine that this 4 to 10 month normal transformation for companies that had never operated this way before, but that will more of the majority operate this way moving forward, is probably been shrunk down. Maybe it's a 2 to 6 month window between now and when they feel good about it, if they're new to it. Longest case I think is 10 months, but for the most part they're going to be out of business in 10 months if they haven't figured out how to rebudget and retarget themselves. So so you're probably halfway through, which means it's now the time, just like I'm shifting gears in these weekly executive briefings to a little bit more tactical and strategic stuff, business stuff, because even though we could go on and on about the humane aspect of, and the mental, emotional component of the crisis and what this has caused, this is now the time where people are not only itching to, but also kind of needing to get back to work. And since we can't just get back to reopening everything, back to planning, back to strategy, back to thinking, and back to communicating about what's next with my customer base is now probably more appropriate. So it's the right time to be starting to have these conversations, if you haven't already, with the sensitivity of people might still be going through some big stuff or still have some fears that are starting to permeate themselves. But for the most part, people are ready to talk business again, I think. And so this is the time to reach out. So number 4, as we kind of round the corner and head for home here, the fourth myth common with zero-based budgeting is that it only focuses on SG&A costs. We always think about headcount cuts and things like that. That's what gets all the headlines. This is not about a certain type of cost. The fundamental elements of zero-based budgeting as a culture, again, go back to governance, accountability, transparency, aligned incentives, and a rigorous analysis of where capital and resources are deployed, as well as what they might yield and what forces outside of their control might impact against those assessments or those anticipations. So this means that CapEx obviously going to be impacted. OpEx will be impacted. So for those who sell SaaS-related services to the middle market, could be a very, very tough time right now. SG&A, obviously, marketing, so agency costs, all that kind of stuff. Variable costs and cost of goods sold. We've already heard ad nauseum about whether or not this is the time where we need to rebuild or nationalize this supply chain, where we have to literally kind of create a new answer, a more independent answer that keeps us globally connected to the economy at large, but that ensures our supply chain for core materials is not dependent on China alone. So cost of goods will go up, which means in the short run, if that's the case, as supply chains get reconfigured, and that's going to put downward pressure on other costs. OpEx is going to be very tough to defend because anything that is a subscription, anything that's a long-term contract is going to be walked away from, as bad as that sounds, by most middle market companies. So if you have built your business and you're a SaaS company, a B2B SaaS company, and you've been selling into a growth curve that is, venture backed, I feel for your venture capital funds because they're not going to get ROI and you're probably not going to be in business. And somebody's going to scoop that thing up at a down round acquisition to acquire that talent. And this is going to probably proliferate at scale in the B2B SaaS world because whether we like it or not, the innovation occurs in the smaller companies, but that growth at all costs and growth at negative profit margin till now is going to be hard to justify in a world where most of your customers are going to be suffering or cutting the very thing that you can't make money on monthly selling them now. And middle market companies and middle market CFOs and small cap CFOs have no problem risking litigation with contractors and breaking contracts because the other choice is just not be in business. And so the likelihood that we'll see a massive contractual default rate on pre-existing commitments below the Fortune 1000 is high. So if you're selling into that space or you're channel partnering into that space, you really have to think about, again, need, ability, replaceability, and get on the horn now. Figure out what feature sets maybe they're not using and they're dormant, that they're subscribing to some other player for. And even if it's not as good, meaning even if your ability in that feature set is not as good, but you bring that as well as the core functionality and your competitors don't, It's a chance to be justified as one of the OpEx expenses that continues when others get cut. Because sometimes good enough is good enough on most feature sets when it comes to shaving and zero-based budgeting. So be proactive, be creative in how you reposition your value prop, and communicate early and often. Lastly, zero-based budgeting, this is a myth. Zero-based budgeting doesn't work well for growth stage companies. We just talked about growth stage companies. Quite the contrary. Research shows, and I'm going to give you a link to a McKinsey post that talks about these myths, but also that goes into more of the research as well at the end of this in the source material. So you can dive deeper if you care to and go down the rabbit hole of zero-based budgeting from there, not just with McKinsey, but with others. So quite the contrary. Even if the focus of your customer, of your customer's company right now, so let's say that you're selling to companies that are growth-oriented companies, and growth just went out the window because the economy's been shut down. But if they're still focused, and let's say they're cash rich, meaning maybe they're still a growth stage company, maybe they're a more mature company, but they've got growth stage elements. Like Amazon's a growth stage company, even though it's an older established company, because cloud is going through the moon, right? So growth, talent acquisition, retention, and high cash on the balance sheet does not mean that zero-based budgeting won't apply. If anything, it means it'll be more applied because cost management is a core DNA strand for sustainable success. And so really what zero-based budgeting is about, when organizations adapt this culture or implement this culture, they're approaching cost management as a core DNA strand. And it works really well regardless of stage if companies can go back to those core elements of transparency, alignment of incentives, justifying and rigorous analysis. So those are the 5 myths being dispelled, the strategies of how you focus on assessment of what need your customer fills in their category, how well they can do it, how vulnerable they might be to massive haircuts, and how replaceable they might be is going to dictate how likely they are to be continuing paying you, vice versa. Whether they're going to see haircuts or growth, how you stack in their set of OpEx or CapEx or whatever expenditures is going to dictate whether or not they can live without you and still operate their core business, whether that's a growth or a maintain or a survive strategy. So law of compensation mixed with that. Resources here as we wind up. You can click on that link and go dive deeper into the McKinsey research and materials around zero-based budgeting. Again, thanks to emerge.com for the sponsorship. My name is J Snook. You can find out more about me there, and presented by Smarter B2B. We will see you next week.